And we are live with another episode of the Connection Loop. I'm your host, Darius Santos, and we are here, guys, to interview sales leaders, VPs, CEOs, entrepreneurs, and business professionals to figure out exactly what they are learning in the market so that you guys can accelerate your learning, your beneficial time spent listening to our podcast so that you can skip the line, learn from some of the leaders in with their boots in the trenches of business today so that you can maybe benefit from some of the best practices and strategies and learnings that they want to share with you. Some of these topics are very near and dear to them. They've, been through the battles, through the fire to bring these lessons and learnings out to you guys. So we're bringing the heat. Now, guys, we have a special guest with us today, as always, but something interesting for you guys, a little bit different. We're not so much talking about a specific strategy of sales or business development, if you will. But instead, we're talking a little bit about culture, and you'd be surprised about actually how culture affects growth directly. This isn't sort of just like warm and fuzzies. It's actually very numerical and scientific in approach. So I'm going to pass it over to Trey. Trey, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then let's go ahead and get right into how culture is going to impact our businesses.
Awesome. Thanks, Darius. Nice to meet y'all, Trey Miles. So before we get started, I want to read a quick definition of culture. I think, culture can get kind of lost in, what is it? It can be kind of amorphous. It can be warm and fuzzy. But I find the definition of culture to be really helpful. And that's just the standards of operation in an organization. So what are the traditions, the actions in an organization? Every organization has culture. Period. It exists, and it's not good or bad. I like to think of it as amoral. So it's like It's not good or bad. It's just it is, right? And the question is not, do we have culture? The question is, are we intentionally creating culture? Are we intentional about the type of culture that we want to create? And one of my favorite lines, I call it the golden rule of sales reps, which is treat your sales reps the way you want your sales reps to treat your clients.
Right.
Your sales reps are your skin. Right? They're the way you interact with the world as a company. And so the question is, how do we want them to operate? And if we want them to be pushy and argumentative and not consultative, that's how we should treat our salespeople. Right. If we want our salespeople to be consultative and caring and connected and curious, that's how we should treat our salespeople.
I love that. No, it's such a shift from what it used to be, right? Or I mean, maybe there's still leaders out there that have that style, like maybe former military or whatever, and they're just like the drill sergeant. You're gonna do what you're gonna, and you hit your quota, but then those people they don't enjoy those jobs. Nobody enjoys being treated like that unless they went to sign up for the military to be treated like, Exactly. So I think that there's those movies that were portrayed in the past where sales was very much like that kind of culture, but people are so averse to that now. No one wants to be like treated like a number or to be talking down to or argue with. Like if you're going to go buy a car, the last thing you want is some guy doing weird, sleazy sales tactics. Like, no, you be helpful. You show us what we need to know about the vehicle, and then that's it. And that type of sales, I agree, has now permeated the demand of what people are expecting from sales. Nobody wants the pushy, weird sales guy who's going to make them uncomfortable. Everyone wants the person who's like not the AI who's going to give them wrong answers, but just someone who's really helpful. Like they have their best, I want to help you.
They know they're coming from that happy to help energy. And that's a really good example of culture. So I'll share a quick story. So I started working on this about 10 years ago. Wow. So I was 28 when I got my first sales management job. I had never managed a person in my life, never done an interview in my life. And I got a call from an old boss and they said, hey, we'd love for you to come be a leader on our team. We think you can hunt and we think you can coach and we think that's what we need. But they told me, they're like, you're going to have everything you need. There's going to be a director there. There's going to be an enablement person there. All you got to do is show up and we'll teach you how to do this thing.
Right.
Well, about 3 weeks before I start, the director quit. And then a week after I started, the enablement person quit. I was like reaching out to them like, hey, when are we going to get training? And
he's like,
I'm out. She's like, no, I don't work here anymore. yeah, so all of a sudden at 28, never having managed a soul in my life, I find myself
Right.
responsible for building an office of 30 people.
Wow.
I had to hire
Crazy.
two managers and 30 reps
Yeah.
without ever having done an interview in my life.
Crazy.
And so I was pretty, as you can, luckily I was young and had a really high confidence level of what I could
Right. You're
achieve.
like, no, I
You know,
got this.
I got it.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
go attack this
yeah,
problem. Yeah.
exactly.
Awesome.
So
Yeah.
but I did what I do, which is I built a plan. I got on a
Yeah.
whiteboard and I started with this idea that if I could help, and I know it sounds a little like a truism now that people talk about, but at the time, this was 10 years ago, nobody was talking about this.
Right.
I had this idea, which was if I could help my reps be the best versions of themselves possible, they would sell more software.
Right.
And so I came up with this cultural value. It was called self-care first, pipeline second.
That's cool.
And we ran the org based off
Yeah.
of self-care first, pipeline second.
Right.
And what happened was we created this culture of care for one another
Yeah.
that if somebody was going through something, we knew about it. If
Right.
somebody was going to lose a deal, they would tell us.
Right.
It created this culture of psychological safety that actually accelerated how we were
Right.
able to grow and scale that org.
Right.
And I'll talk a little bit about that, but the outcomes were that team went 200% of their number in that first year.
Wow.
Ha-
Right.
over over half those people we hired made club. Like it
Right.
was one of those like
Yeah.
banner years. We all doubled our income. Like it was
Yeah.
crazy. And a lot
Awesome.
of that had to do with in a moment where that company, like I think the broader organization was 60% of their number. They had over a 50% rep churn. We lost no one off that team.
Right.
0% quit.
Wow.
Nobody
Yeah.
quit that year
Right.
out of 30 people, which for a
Yeah.
sales team's pretty
That's
wild.
insane. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Right.
pretty wild.
Yeah.
And a lot of that had to do with people felt cared for. They felt like they mattered. They felt like they were a person, and it reflected in the way that they interacted with their clients.
Right.
So yeah, it became this thing that was self-reinforcing. And again, a lot of the value was they interacted with their clients in a way that was more collaborative and
Right.
connected because they felt collaborated with and
Right.
connected to by their leader.
Yeah.
They also, if something went wrong, they told me because they knew I
Right.
wasn't gonna,
Right. Yeah. You're
hey,
not there to crack the whip or to punish
yeah,
them. You're like,
right,
oh, look, we made a mistake. How do we learn from it? How do we stop that from
yeah,
happening again? Yeah.
yeah,
It's a different, it's like
different
it's like the
energy.
good parent, bad parent. The good
Yeah,
parent, oh, you made a mistake. You made a fumble. Okay. How do we make it better? How do we not do that again? And versus the bad
yep,
parent, it's like, I'm going to punish without
yeah,
any forethought or afterthought or no, that's,
hmm
it's hilarious because, I'm a new parent and,
yeah,
so I'm going through that part, but also as a sales leader in our own organization, I've always taken that approach where I try to be really empathetic, really,
totally.
sympathetic to their issues. We have some moms on our team, like they have
hmm
kids, and
hmm
but thankfully our sales team, they are really close. They happen to actually
Yeah,
know. We ended up hiring people that ended up knowing each other outside of this world, so they already had some of that culture
that's
internally
great.
where they were like, "You need help on a deal, I got you. I need to cover you for this and cover you." So we sort of had that thing. It was luck, if you'll call it that.
Yeah,
Where we
yeah,
happened to hire people that were already had that sort of their own culture,
hmm
their own family culture, even,
hmm
and then we benefited from that as a team and got to see,
hmm
this works really well. And so I always like these lessons where we come to find out something we did in the past was like totally a cool, effective thing. We just didn't
Yeah,
have like a framework or
hmm
a label for it. So
yeah.
that's something we like to see as well. Very cool.
Yeah, and since then, so like at the time, again, like it was,
Right. Yeah.
I
10
was
years ago,
like,
there was none of that.
I was
Yeah.
just kind of
Yeah.
like drowning. And this was just like, all right, cool. Like I got to figure this thing out. Like this feels like the way to do it. Since then, again, one of the things I've done is I've built several orgs at this point. And one of the
Yeah.
things I like to think about is again, I reverse engineer the type of culture that needs to exist based off the client experience we're trying to create.
Right.
So what does that mean? So if I'm working with a startup, for example,
Mhm.
I'll talk to the founding team about how have you operated that differentiates your not the product, but the experience that you create for the customer.
Right.
And then you can reverse engineer that into what does this mean from an operating model for the culture? What
Mhm.
needs to be the culture to codify this type of motion?
Right.
And I'll give you an example. So when I was leading this first sales team when I was 28, I basically came up with this idea that if someone came and asked me for time off, I would double it. So if
Right.
someone came and said, "Hey, I'm sick today. Can I take the
Yeah.
afternoon off?" I'd be like, "Great. Do you need a day?"
Yeah.
Hey, I've got an emergency at home. I need the afternoon. Great. Can you take a day? Hey, I'm going to
Right.
take a week off. Great. You need two. Right.
Right.
So
Right.
it was a way for me to, I call it patterns and anti-patterns. So what I do
Hmm.
is you look for what are the patterns of behavior that represent this culture. So
Right.
let's work it down. If we want to create a consultative sales cycle, what are the patterns of behavior in our culture? And more importantly, what are the anti-patterns that are
Hmm.
not consultative?
Right.
So
Like
that's
the no, that just knowing the answer or taking action or whatever without questioning, without
yeah.
listening. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I'm a sales leader, right, and I want to create a consultative sales team, and
Yeah.
I'm not being curious with my reps about what's happening, and I just jump to conclusions based off what's going on in their deals, how do you think they're going to operate with their clients?
Right. Right.
Right? So if I create if I create the behavior in the culture by being intentional about what types of behaviors as a sales leader I want to
Right.
exemplify from my reps, I'm going to be able to codify and in the moments where I'm not in the room, in the
Right.
moments between those interactions where
Yeah.
that behavior is going to happen organically, because that's just how we operate.
It's exactly lead by example. Now, I really
Exactly.
like that too. That we're this idea that we need to lead by example, right? Because they're gonna, especially people that you've trained yourself, they're going to operate in ways that you show them. It's just like
Hmm.
children or whatever. Like that, it's
Hmm.
they're not always going to
Totally.
say here's exactly what I'm telling you to do, but instead they're going to look at the behaviors and they're going to follow suit. And I 100% agree with that as well. I've seen that in a number of
Totally.
organizations where people one person starts taking time off and then the other people want to start taking time off, or one person is having this great success and everyone wants to do that great success, so good
Totally.
or bad.
Totally.
People definitely follow what's happening in an
Hmm.
organization, and it
Yeah.
starts at the leadership level. Yeah.
And the thing I like to say is the good news and bad news about culture is it starts at the leadership level. That's the
Yeah.
good news. The bad
Right.
news is if you don't like it, if you don't like the way your team's operating with their
You
clients
got
or
to look for
between calls,
yourself.
you got to be self-reflective,
Yeah.
right? Like that's
Right.
about you. Now you can have somebody that is, and again, this, back to hiring, right? We kind of talked about this earlier.
Right.
Like this is also where hiring comes in. Because if I'm not clear about what types of values we want to hold as a standard, I don't
Right.
know how to hire for that, right? So
Right.
there's this entire loop that can get created, connection loop,
Yeah.
around
Yeah.
the being intentional about the values we want to, or the culture that we want to create, right?
Right.
What does that mean from a patterns and anti-patterns, and what does that look like from a hiring perspective? What are questions we need to ask? What do we need to vet people to understand? Are they
Right.
going to be a fit for this type of operating model? I even
Right.
call it an operating system, because
Yeah.
if you think about culture, culture is the operating system.
Right. Right.
It's not the program. The program's the
Yeah, it's the
training,
thing,
right?
the way we operate, the way that we go about our behaviors, the rules and things that we have in place. When you walk in, you say hello, and then you sit down, and then that's all part of our culture, and
That's our
it's our operating
culture.
system. Yeah,
It's our
makes
operating
sense.
system,
Yeah,
right? So how do we instill, if you're building a team or you're the first sales rep or you're early in an organization, you can be intentional about culture or you can be unintentional about culture.
right.
And
Yeah,
when you're dealing with a year like we had in 2023, when it's just a roller coaster and it's crazy and stuff's everywhere, I
right.
really hope you're intentional.
Yeah,
Because when you're intentional, unintentional is fine when everything's going great.
yeah, right. Like it's working. Well, don't
Yeah, it's
break
great.
anything.
Everything's
Yeah,
fine. Don't change. But when you're intentional and the chips are down, you know what your North Star looks like. You know where you're headed. You know what direction you're trying to take your culture. And the
yeah,
direction that you take your culture ultimately impacts the outcomes that you're going to create, because again, it's the operating system.
right,
You cannot instill a strategy in an organization that goes against the culture.
right.
Culture has to be the foundation, because if you
Yeah,
try to implement a strategy that goes against culture, it's going to fail every time.
right.
You have to change your culture first. Culture is the operating system. It's the
No,
thing that
and I
is
like that
underneath it all.
this technical definition of culture in this business aspect, because when people think culture, they think like, oh, we have a ping pong table,
Yeah,
or we
ping pong,
we give
pizza.
Starbucks gift cards, or like that's not what we're talking about here when
No,
we're referencing culture.
no.
We're actually talking about how does your business operate. Well, like when the rep walks in the morning, comes in the morning, signs in the morning, what are their activities? What are your activities as the leader to guide them along, for them to follow suit, right? um,
Hmm.
if you're halfway showing up, I would not be surprised if your reps would be following some similar suit, right? If they
Totally.
see that you're not all there, or not caring, or pushy, or bossy, or right, the negative aspects,
Yeah.
there's a high likelihood they're going to follow something similar. Like, well, this is how we operate. That's our culture. So
This is how we do, right?
yeah,
This is our way of being. This is just who we are. And
right.
that's gonna play itself out with the team, with the client. That's why I say, like, kind of go back to the beginning. I reverse engineer all this with the statement, treat your reps the way you want your reps to treat your clients. So if
Right.
you can start with, what do we hope the client experience is, you can
Mhm.
then work your way back to, what are the patterns and standards of behavior that I need to hold myself and my leadership team accountable to then instill in my team.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's how we get
I,
it really intentional about creating culture.
No, I love this this concept of what culture actually is, how it actually directly impacts your business, guys. Again, this is not the ping pong table or the casual Fridays. It's how your business operates, how from a leadership level, everything trickles down, and then how the behaviors and day-to-day actions of your business and your activities are going to directly impact your employees and their activities.
Yep.
And then being intentional about it, I think, is the most important thing, because I think culture sort of happens accidentally in a lot of, or especially startup organizations, right? Where we're all flying by the seat of our
Everybody's
pants,
running by
and
the seat of their
yeah,
pants. Yeah.
exactly. It's building the
Hmm.
plane as it's going,
Flying.
and so
Hmm.
exactly. So so we're just kind of finding these things. But I do believe what you've expressed here is having the culture, having intentional, meaningful, thought out plans to for people to follow. It's just going to make everything else follow in place. It's going to allow you as the leader in your organization, whether you're the founder or the sales leader, it's going to allow your values, the things that you stand for, but good or bad,
Good or
to
bad.
be transferred down to your team.
Yeah.
Now, hopefully, if you're in a founder-led organization, you have some good values to pass down, or if you're hiring your sales leader, that you're hiring the right person to pass down
Totally.
their values as well. Because the times are changing, right? You don't want the aggressive salesperson just because maybe your style might work well with something better, but you have to think about the wider marketplace.
Hmm.
People want to work with consultants these days. They don't want the higher pressured sales. So
Totally.
even if your background, may not be optimal for what is optimal for what your customer experience should be. So keep all those things in mind, guys, when you're trying to be intentional about your culture. Take your ego out of it, right? Like our own
Hmm.
ego. We might try to build, especially founder-led organizations, we might put too much of ourselves in it. And it's not necessarily about us. It's about the success and health of our business and our product.
Yeah.
And that's what ultimately is going to lead to your own success as a sales leader, as a founder. So, Trey, any final notes here
Yeah.
on? Go
One
ahead.
last thing is, if I could give anybody three pieces of advice, the first one
Mm,
is, be really clear about what your values are as an organization. But more importantly, what does it look like to operate in those values? And what does it look like to not operate in those values?
right.
And then how are you going to hold your team accountable, especially the leadership team, to being in the values?
Right.
From there, the third thing, so that's like one and two. The third thing would be, reverse engineer your customer experience. What is the customer experience we're trying to create? And what does that mean from how our team should be engaged with
Right.
to create that customer experience? So those are the three things I would give to intentionally create culture.
I love that. Awesome. And guys, and thank you. I didn't even ask for it, but that's always what we try to do in these episodes, guys, is give you something to walk away with that you can actually go turn on in your business, in your life today. And we just got those 3 bullets there. So Trey, thank you for your time. We got one more thing here that I think you wanted to share. I'm gonna post here his LinkedIn. Um, Here we go. So guys, if you want to get in touch with Trey, his LinkedIn is here. Trey, did you have something else you wanted to mention? Maybe something in the works, or what do you got?
Yeah, so I'm currently working with companies to do this type of culture work. So, if please go do the 3 bullets. Everybody go
Yeah.
do that. But if you need some help, or you want someone to help guide you through that process, one of the things I'm focused on is, how do you take the so I always say, if you're a founder, right, or even an
Right.
early salesperson in an organization, it's hard to see the stuff that's working. Somebody from
Right.
the outside like me can come in and say, cool, what are the DNA? What's the operating system? I'm starting to kind of loosely brand this thing the founder's operating system.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what are the cultural values that are represented in the early success of the founder? How do we create process around that? And then
Right.
how do we then institutionalize that using enablement for the sales team? And then how does that then impact the founder's DNA? So
Awesome.
there's kind of a flywheel that gets created. Again, I'm working with a company called, or we'll be working with a company called Growth Gen. So check it out. There's going to be a lot of content. There's content on my LinkedIn profile about this topic, and if you want some help, feel free to reach out.
Amazing, guys. So that link is there in the LinkedIn. More stuff coming. Sounds like a really cool program we got in store for founders as well. So follow him now, and then that way you guys maybe get some early adoption benefit or something.
Totally.
Cool. Well, thanks for your time, everybody. See you in the next episode of Connection Loop.